2-month study about being more like Jesus, having the love and empathy and care that Jesus had for mankind, for each one of us. And as I mentioned, this is sort of a back to basics, just a very easy study, hopefully involvement conversation. I've got a lot of scriptures to go over that some of those we will read together, and some of those we'll have for you to write down and go through your study through the week with this. How we are to treat our brothers and sisters, everyone that comes in contact with us, is a reflection on Jesus. Is that a fair statement? Our relationship with Jesus and our faith. We had class, Brother Casey taught the timeline. This is in no way that type of class. I love that class. But this is definitely more getting back to basics, and we're going to build on it. As I mentioned, in December and January, the elders will be talking to us about leadership and the responsibilities that come with that, and in the supportive role of each one of us as well. And so I hope that this will benefit you. One of the things that, as I went through the study a little over a year ago, and then have spent a good bit of time on it, involves a buzz phrase that we've heard all of us have: emotional intelligence. And when we think about emotional intelligence in general, and we think about Jesus being the greatest example of that, there are 4 characteristics of being emotionally intelligent. One is having self-awareness. Someone tell me, what does it mean to have self-awareness? Anyone? You're aware of self? Mm-hmm. Yep. You're aware of the things that you do and you say. And remember the first week, for those of you that were here, can you go back in your mind to a conversation you had with someone about anything, and the look on their face was like, what? I mean, or maybe they got red. Maybe they looked angry. If you think to yourself, what did I say and what did I do to make them feel that way, you've got a high emotional intelligence, and you've got great self-awareness. If you think, oh, they must have just swallowed a bug, you probably don't have good self-awareness, right? We're going to talk specifically a little bit more this morning about Jesus and his self-awareness. Then the second one, social awareness, which is empathy. Someone tell me again, what is empathy? What's the difference in sympathy and empathy? Feeling what other people feel. Jesus pretty good at that? Really good at that, right? All right, and then you have self-management. So when we think about Jesus and he lived a perfect life, what did he need to do as far as self-management go? He did a great job with it, but anybody have a good example about self-management? Mm-hmm. I love that, because I've seen a lot over the years about how, especially on social media, it'll say it's hard for you to talk ill of your brothers and sisters if you're always in prayer to God, or if you're always thinking positive and having optimism about Christianity and those types of things. And then finally, the fourth aspect of being emotionally intelligent is managing others. Is Jesus very good at managing others? Think about the fisherman, right? He did. I still think about, well, I think he was a good leader, not by forcing, for sure. I think he was the greatest example. Does he ever expect us to do anything that he didn't do himself or go through himself? And of course, the answer to that is no. So we'll go through a couple of the notes that I jotted down this week. A few explicit statements in the gospel confirms Jesus and his emotional intelligence. Matthew chapter 7, verse 35. The first person there, just read it loudly for us. Matthew 7 and verse 35. I wrote down the wrong verse then. I got it here. That was not a purposeful trick. I was not trying to trick you. I'll find that. Let's see here. Let's come back to that. I've got that. I just wrote down the wrong verse there. Basically, what we're talking about here is when you look at your brothers and sisters and you look at them with a critical eye, the Bible tells us that you are to take the beam out of your own eye, right? As you're doing that. Why is that significant with our study? Why is it significant that it says take the beam out of your own eye? So that's the obvious answer. What I'll throw out to you real quickly is, have you ever been around someone or in a setting that seemed to have everything in life that involved you figured out? If you just do this, you'd be more successful. If you just do this, maybe they didn't even say that, but my point is, we sometimes as humans feel like we could live someone else's life better than they're doing it. Does that make any sense, what I'm saying right now? Right? And so God made us all in His image. We're all great creatures, but we all have to make sure that we are trying to encourage one another and not find fault in one another. Now, that does not mean that we're to not help, encourage, and go to our brother or sister if they're doing wrong, right? Do we understand the difference in going to them with love, care, and empathy instead of this way? When I say we're getting back to the basics of it, we're just talking about love and empathy for a moment. We know that we have work to do as well. It talks about loving one's enemies or forgiving without limit. Can we talk about that for just a moment? What does it mean, forgiving without limits? We all know the 70 times 7, right? Lisa, we put caveats on it, right? There are hoops you need to jump through before I hand out my forgiveness to you. Before they even ask you. Someone else had their hand up back here. Lester. Yes, thank you. So that shows you I just left out the dash. I knew what I was doing. It wasn't 35, it was 3 through 5. When we think about forgiving before they even ask, I never want us to get specific with names in this class. I don't think that's what our time would be well spent doing. But if you don't mind, raise your hand if you still remember anything in your life where somebody did something to you that wasn't awesome, great, and encouraging. I'll just go ahead and raise mine. I still remember. Right? I'm not keeping score. I try to forget it, and sometimes I go through days, weeks, and months, maybe even years, without thinking about it. And then one thing happens, and it takes me right back there. Your memory, he said, Brother Melvin said, our memory won't let us forget things. Yeah. It's good and bad. Anybody willing to share this? Oh, John. Right. Absolutely. We're going to come back to that, Brother Dickerson. Yes, absolutely. That's right. Sure. That's a great point. We obviously have work to do with that. When you think about if someone is constantly reminding you of what you've done wrong, and they haven't forgiven you, what are some things you can do? Does anybody have something that works for them you can share with all of us? Avoid that person. Those people exist, certainly. Sometimes, are we sometimes better people around certain people, and other people could bring out the worst in us? We have to work at it, strive. But anybody willing to share something you do when, let's just put it on the other foot. Instead of someone being ugly to you, perhaps you've done something in a moment of weakness, or even unintentionally done something, and they just can't seem to get over it and forgive you. How can we approach them? What can we do other than just pray? Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And sometimes it's hard, depending on the relationship of the people that are in that conflict or in that offensive moment. But I think all we can do is just try to be better every day, right? Pray about it, study, seek counsel of others. If I'm going to start working back out and lose some weight, which I need to do, year 10, trying to get that going, right? But as we do that, I'm going to someone that seems to have that under control and be good at that. Well, when it looks to me like, from a Christianity standpoint, this person maybe has a better approach than I do, I like to lean on that person. Anybody else seek counsel of others and other Christians and try to figure out? That's why I said anything you can share is helpful to us. Right. I have a really good friend I went to Harding with, and I remember him telling the story at a Devo on campus one night. He said, I was so upset with this guy at school growing up, and he said, every day I thought of ways to say things that would cut and things that would let him know my displeasure and my hurt and pain, and I just really was building up my arsenal. I'll never forget the way he said that. I was ready to go. And he said about 6 months in, that person was walking across campus and around the school grounds and was getting closer to me, and I was ready. And as soon as they walked up on me, they said, hey, it's been on my heart and mind, and I've been praying about this for months, and I'm embarrassed I haven't already come to you. But you probably don't even remember. But here's something I said and did, and I shouldn't have done that, and I'm so sorry. My friend said he went, boo. I mean, just took the wind out of his sail, right? Well, if you remember, and we're getting back to the Jesus application of this, if you remember a hurt that you've done to someone yourself, do you think they do too? If you're still thinking about it, right? Didn't even know. Sure. I think that's a great point. As we go through our study, especially in the Gospels, about the way Jesus approached people and he approached things, I think it's obvious that he was the greatest example. But as Brother Melvin said, he would go in private and talk to his Father. he would pray for that. And I think if we're going to commit to being more like Jesus, we must pray for that, right? I'm using the word must. Agree or disagree? If you're going to commit something, so when we think about how often our cell phone dings, yeah, I don't know if you have your audio turned up on it or the button flipped, but the research shows that every time it does that, it's a quick shot of adrenaline. And so you must look at it, right? You have to. And so you're doing that all day long. And then we've got Netflix and all of these streaming services that have 5 million shows on them. You can never stop watching television if that was your goal, right? And then we think about the hustle and bustle of the work week and the school week and all of the different things. So what we ask is, or what I'm asking this morning is, when is your private time, your quiet time in prayer with the Lord to commit ourselves to being more like Jesus? All of those other things can have some positive elements to them. Sure. I'm not saying go throw your phones away and stop watching Netflix. That's not what we're talking about this morning. But if we're not, say it again. You can. What I guess the biggest thing I'm saying is, are there distractions that get in the way of our focus on being more like Jesus? They're readily available 24/7, right? So would you say it has to be a conscious effort to be more like Jesus? And that begins with the prayer. That's what I'm getting back to, is I think we have to commit that certainly in prayer. So we know Jesus, in the Bible, it warns against anger, greed, lust, worry, fear, and hatred. Mark chapter 6 talks a little bit more about that as well. Last week we talked about those that are guilty of one are guilty of all. So murder and gossip are weighted exactly the same in the sin category. Is that fair? So we have to be careful that we're not making excuses for what we're doing wrong. Jesus was portrayed as having compassion and empathy or mercy towards the sick. He says that those show mercy are blessed. Yep. So the devil's at work all the time, right? This is something, again, I'm a teacher of repetition. So again, for those that bothers, I'm sorry. It's the way I learn. But what is your difficult sin to overcome may not be mine. And what is mine may not be yours. Is that fair? So that's where we go back to having empathy and being relatable and praying for our brothers and sisters, because what they're going through, you may for just a moment, hopefully not, but as a Christian for just a moment, you may be thinking, that wouldn't bother me at all. I'm not tempted at all by that. That's great, but you have yours, right? He does. When we think back in your minds, if you will, and for those of you that are younger, y'all forgive me because I'm old. But when we think about what was a temptation at 18, was it a temptation at 28? Maybe, maybe not. Whatever was a temptation at 28, is it at 38? Maybe, maybe not. So when you say the devil's constantly working and when the devil's constantly looking, I'm saying your temptations can be the same from birth to death, or they can change with you. Does everybody understand what I mean by that? So as we look at twin 17-year-old girls and we look at our grandchildren and the different things, they're going through a tough time right now. The world's crazy, right? But I'm not going to stand in front of you today and say it was any less crazy during the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? It's a different crazy. Yes. Yeah. Right. I appreciate you sharing that. I will say it's extremely encouraging when you're falling short and you come forward or you reach out or you ask for prayers, whatever it is, and someone says, "Hey, I've been there. I know what you're going through. This is, this too shall pass, love you," that kind of thing. Does anybody else find that encouraging? Should we be handing out that encouragement pretty freely? I think so. I think that's part of what I like about us, love about being able to come forward. We're here to worship the Lord this morning, and the reverence that we are to show to the King, right? But in the same token, we have an opportunity together to help lift one another up and let them know we care about them. When I think about being relatable to Jesus, and this is one I'm sure that you can do off the top of your head, but just the first person there, John chapter 11, verse 35. We'll take this, if you've been waiting to read, but you don't want to read the long scripture, this is your time. John 11:35. Someone say it out loud. Jesus wept. What did Jesus weep about? What just happened right here? Mary was upset and crying. Lazarus had passed away. Did Jesus love Lazarus? Did he love Mary? And he wept. Do we weep? Do we weep when our brothers and sisters are struggling, what they go through? If we're going to be more like Jesus, then yes, we should. We should have that type of empathy and love for one another. Again, Jesus was the greatest example of that. Shows his compassion. Luke 19 talks about he also wept over the city of Jerusalem. He displayed positive emotions, and he avoided some of the negative emotions such as fear, anger, and hatred. Do you believe that things concerned Jesus from a physical standpoint? Was he concerned about physical? Say it again. It should be what makes it more relatable. And what Brother Dickerson's saying there is, did he face hunger and thirst? Did the devil come to him when he had just finished a big banquet meal and was full and tempted him, or did he know he hasn't eaten in a long time? Now's a great time. Mm-hmm. Sure. So let's do this for a moment. We've got a new week started today, and we're going out when we leave here today or tonight after church, and we're going back into the world, and we're going to be more like Jesus. How do we approach this week? And again, I'm not necessarily asking for a specific example, but I'm always open to listening to it. But how many of us are saying, Lord, let this week be, I find the older I get, I say uneventful. I don't know if that covers things or not, but I say that a lot, right? But Lord, help this be a great week. Are we praying, Lord, help me be a light? Help me be an example. Help someone want to come to church and worship because of the way I treat people and the way that I love. And help me be more like you, right? Be more like Jesus, right? One of the things we mentioned probably 11 times last Sunday morning is when Jesus was questioned, he more times than not said, "It is written," or "My Father says." He never threw in the, "Well, it is my opinion that this is the way things should be." And so, unfortunately, the world in which we live, if you are optimistic or you are encouraging or you are kind, by worldly standards, it can be portrayed as what? A weakness. I would contend it's exactly the opposite. Through Jesus, all the way through death on the cross, what a wonderful, loving, caring leader, because he was willing to give it all up for us, right? That's a sign of strength. How easy is that to let him be in charge? Brother Melvin just said we have to let him be in charge. Anybody else feel that way? Pray to God for something. Say, "God, if it's your will, but right now I'm turning it over to you," and then we still are holding on to it. That's human nature, isn't it? We've got to trust. That's going to come through study and prayer, edification, being together. We've got to encourage one another. It's a tough world we live in, certainly. I've mentioned it before. One of the worst things I would think personally is for Judgment Day to come and your neighbor that lives close to you had no idea that you were a Christian. I'm just talking about lives close to you in proximity, right? They're your next door neighbor, but you've never invited them to church. You've never talked to them about Jesus, all of those things. Now, again, I'm not going to say who's guilty of that in here this morning, but I am saying, looking inward, are we spreading the gospel? Are we talking to others about Jesus? Brother Dickerson. This goes way back, late 80s, early 90s, and that song came out, and I thank God for unanswered prayers. Does God know better than we know? You know, how many of you have ever prayed, "Lord, if you'll just do this, if you can give this to me, I'm going to make the most of it." And maybe you did get it, but maybe you didn't and something better happened. Or maybe something better happened and you didn't really even know that it was better at the time. But years later, you can look back at, is that just me, or y'all have some times where you say, "Oh, Lord, thank you that you did not give me what I asked for"? And so I think that's one of the things. I've got a friend I work with now, and he likes to talk about karma a lot. I avoid that subject, right? But more times than not, as he and I talk, I will tell him, I never pray that someone else, or think that I hope someone else gets what's coming to them, because I don't want to get what's coming to me if I don't have Jesus and forgiveness. Let's do this, and again, don't raise your hand or not. I'm going to close my eyes. But how many of you have maybe sped a little bit on the highway, maybe cut somebody off, maybe looked over and gave them some interpersonal communications that you shouldn't have? Maybe those things. But then the very next day, somebody does all of that to you, and you go, "Lord, let them get a ticket. They're going to find out when that cop gets them." Do those things go through our minds as human beings? I start out in my driveway in Batesville. I saw you raise your hand. I'm sharing it with you. It's a struggle for me. So I start out right here in Batesville, and I hit Highway 6 East, and I see the same people every morning just about. And it's the same angry people driving from here to Oxford. I cannot figure it out, but there are some really upset folks. With that in mind, I'll go, Lord, just help me have a good attitude about that. And I barely get in front of Lowe's before somebody's already cut me off or something has happened. So that's the devil part of it. I just try to stay in a positive process, but I fail. You know, we've mentioned that 100 times before. If you pray for patience, God will give you opportunity to work on your patience. It is that way about everything we do. In order for you to become stronger, you have to go through a struggle. Is that fair? Lifting weights to build up muscle is tearing down things to build up. Okay? So we have to have that resistance and that weight to make things change. It's the same thing in our Christian life. Lord, help me be a better forgiver of people. How can you become a better forgiver? Start forgiving. What'd you say? Somebody's going to have to do you wrong for you to forgive. Right? So I'm very careful how specific I am with my prayers, right? Because I do want to be a good forgiver. But I don't necessarily want anybody to ever wrong me. Yes. Yeah. And for us to decide that we want to do it, to serve Jesus, to be better, to change, as Mario is saying, we can do that. We've got to make that decision. But a lot of that comes through prayer and study. I would contend most of that comes through prayer, if not all. But that's a great point, Mario. Appreciate that. Let's look at another scripture here. Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. And it says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen of them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. How good are we trying to be more like Jesus at doing this, or maybe not doing this? And what I mean by that is, if Brother Melvin does something for me and helps me and does something, and someone else sees it, that doesn't make it wrong. But if the only reason Brother Melvin's doing that is so that you will praise him and lift him up and keep score of all the good that he's done, that's where the wrong comes in, right? So when Jesus, as we're trying to be more like him, was doing all of his great works here on earth, what was he doing it for? Give God the glory. For those of you, we're right in the middle of football season, and 99% of us are somehow touched by sports, whether it's kids, grandkids, or our glory days years ago, those types of things. But I still like it when someone gets the microphone in front of them and they say, I just want to start by thanking the Lord for what he's done for me and all that. You have to be careful not to let your mind go somewhere. Now, isn't that the same guy that did those bad things that we all know about because I saw it on the news? I mean, I like it that someone is giving praise and glory to the Lord, and that's being more like Jesus, right? I have a relative that says, don't steal the jewels out of somebody else's crown. And what she was saying at that time was this: if someone comes up and says, Brother Mickey, I love you, you're a great man and a great encourager, and you go, no, I'm not. Yeah, you are. No, stop saying that. I'm not, right? I'm not saying it's wrong, that example. What I am saying is someone else has gotten up the courage to say something to you that lifts you up. What's a great answer if we're trying to be more loving and kind and encouraging? Thank you. I'm humbled by that. Or I give God the glory. Would that, depending on who you're talking to, that could shake somebody, couldn't it? Out of left field. I always appreciate that, because I think we're sometimes better at giving compliments than we are at accepting them. But I think if it's to glorify God, if it's to be more like Jesus, then that's wonderful, isn't it? I think so as well. I like that thorough study. Yes, ma'am. And that's a tough call, because I've had that thought. You want to put something out there because it's what we do in this time that we're living in, right? Everything's documented. I've got a friend I worked with in Georgia in television, and he tells me all the time, I will never know to my deathbed why somebody thinks a picture of their plate with food on it would be something I would be interested in hearing, right? It's what we do. It's what we do. Here I am walking into Walmart, right? I mean, it's just part of it. But I think we have to be careful that we're not throwing things out there so that someone will lift us up. But I do like it when it says, hey, here's the Batesville Church of Christ youth group raking leaves for someone in the community. Here's the leadership doing this. Here are the members doing that and helping. I think that goes to glorify the Lord. And so I love that. That's a great point, Lee. Turn to Matthew chapter 5. And again, just someone loudly read so we can all hear. Read verses 23 and 24. This is more than likely what we'll end our time this morning with. Matthew chapter 5, verses 23 and 24. First person there, please read it. So when we started class this morning and we talked about empathy and love and care and all of those things, and then we talked about, I asked, have any of you ever, do you remember something that was done to you or something that offended you or hurt your feelings, whatever it was? What exactly, what Sister Bobo just read, what exactly is this about, these two verses? About forgiving? Getting right before God before you worship. So that's where we come full circle this morning. If you do remember of a situation where you've offended someone, maybe even they've offended you, or maybe you didn't do all you could do, those types of things, especially if it has been a discouragement and it's led somebody to stop coming to church. I think so. It is telling us to get our hearts, our minds, and our lives right before we can even worship the Lord this morning and take communion, right? Think back to the death, burial, and resurrection, those types of things. Examine ourselves. So is this an option? Is it literal? So we have to challenge ourselves this morning. Is there someone I've offended? Is there someone that I've been ugly to? Is there someone I've discouraged? If we have not treated them the way Jesus would have treated them, we've fallen short with that. We really need to make it right, because just sitting in the pew this morning and singing and taking communion and giving and listening to Michael's lesson and all of those things, if we've not corrected the other aspects, is it in vain? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Can we put another spin on it? Is there something else that I haven't covered on this morning? If Judgment Day comes later today, and it could happen, right? Blink of an eye. Are we right? If we're living more like Jesus, are we right in the eyes of the other people around us as well? And what I mean by that is that from an offensive way, we need to make things right. Let's close with a couple thoughts. Anybody have any thoughts on this study or anything you can share with any of us? Purge your heart. It's great, right? We've got to clear out our hearts of all that poison, all that venom, all of that bad and the hurt for Jesus to have a part in your heart, right? That's a wonderful share there. One more. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. That's a great share as well. And by the way, he is right beside us. I mean, he's with us everywhere we go, right? So there's no hiding from it. And so as we think about that, we go out this week, we're trying to be more like Jesus, really focus on our relationships with others and being an encouragement, loving and kind, but also knowing how serious it is. You know, if Judgment Day comes today, are we prepared? Before we worship today, and it says, go make it right with your brother, is that literal? We've all agreed it is. We better go get it right away. So thank you for the feedback and comments, and we'll get into the Prince of Peace next Sunday.